Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we're continuing to work on our traditional snake game with a little twist. Now, last time we added a currency system to our game. This system would give value to not only the upgrade buildings we added in a previous episode, but also the snake's body parts. The system furthers our project from the traditional snake game as we know it, and also helps continue paving the way for our final vision. And with today's plan, the move towards that vision goes on, because I have something in mind, but it's gonna take some setting up. So first, we'll be adding a world border to our game, one that can be expanded, which we'll focus on at a later date. Next, we'll be adding time control to our game, specifically slow-mo, probably better recognized as quote-unquote bullet time. But the focus won't exactly be for gameplay purposes, rather we'll be adding it to accommodate the addition of a menu system. Now trust me, that's a tall order, so let's not waste any more time and get to the coding. To kick things off, we'd need a couple variables to determine width and height of the border. Then in a reusable user event, the code would first check for a pre-existing wall and delete it. Ignore the error in the destroy code, that gets fixed at some point. Next, we'd create the world border based on the two variables we just added. And indeed, math was required to get this working. In order to keep things organized, I had the border build based on the middle of the room. This required taking the middle point of the room and offsetting the spawning of the border by half. And much like any time math has ever been involved in this series, this took a while to get right. But eventually, the magic of having a proper border spawn was achieved. So with that working, it was time to make this whole thing more dynamic. In the camera code, I had the camera maintain its position in the middle of the room. Then using the border variables, the camera would resize to match the border. In other words, the camera would zoom out as the world border expands, so that all the action remains on screen at all times. And in order to make things more organized, the border variables were changed to global variables. The results were, well, technically what we were after. However, there was a very apparent issue with the camera not remaining centered, and no matter what was tried, it just wouldn't budge. However, since recording this, I think I figured out what went wrong. For the time being though, the border at least worked, so it was time to move on. Next up was the bullet time feature. This would require yet another variable, global of course. And indeed, hot tip, macros are a great nifty little way to shorten calling global variables. Anyway, moving on to several time-based bits of our game, such as the tick timer, all we need to do is multiply said time variable by the global time variable. The same would apply to enemy movement and bullet movement. Then for the sake of testing purposes, I had X control the speed of time, which would be halved when pressed. The results were mixed. The tick timer would slow down, but the enemy movement and bullets would freeze in place. So back to the code it was to figure out what went wrong. Turns out I forgot how movement worked with these two objects. The code basically reset these two objects' movements, and because 0 multiplied by 0 is, well, 0, yeah. To fix this simply required a reference variable for default speeds and another variable that would do the math. And as you can see, this fixed the speed issues, giving us what is essentially slow motion, aka bullet time. And the results are pretty obvious. While X is held down, everything moves at half the speed it normally would. So with this now working, we can move on to activating it through our next addition, menus. Time was limited here, so on creation, the menu would activate slow-mo just like holding X did during our tests. And when the menu has been destroyed, it would reset the speed back to normal. Then in the draw event, I drew some random text and a box just to have something appear on screen. The idea behind the menu slowing down time was to maintain gameplay flow. Pausing the action to place a building seems like it would ease the tension that Snake is supposed to provide, in that it's always supposed to be moving. But having to place buildings in real time, especially when important details are tied to said buildings, well, there has to be some middle ground, and so slowing down the action seemed like a good compromise. So with the menu now in our game, I also finally added collision checks to both the body and walls for Snake's head. Collision with said objects would reset the game, just as they would in traditional Snake. And there we had it, everything I managed to get done in this session. We now had a world border to keep our player contained. We also now have slow motion and menus that will hopefully jive well with the building placement. And finally, we had a lose condition for our Snake game. Though they all still need some work, we're making some great progress. It's progress that helps us round out the rest of the game's features, which will hopefully finally move us out of the prototype phase. I'm actually getting really excited to see where this one goes, but sadly that'll have to wait because this brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.